Previously, we spoke about our crook position, which is our tall sitting position with knees bent, and today we're going to talk about our C curve and some of the variations available to our C curve and some of the compensations that tend to show up when people try and find their C curve. So sometimes when I'm teaching, I like to teach a sort of a seated cat and cow so that people can start to mobilize into their spines and mobilize into the pelvis as well. So we've got the pelvis, which is rotating around the femoral head, sort of on that ball and socket joint. So the pelvis needs to tuck under, tailbone needs to curl under, and then we start to move into spine flexion and extension. So we touched on that briefly in the previous video. So with our C curve, our C shape, we're not just finding spine flexion where everything is just folding over into that flexed spine position, but rather we're getting a deep abdominal activation where these transverse abdominis muscles, which wrap all the way around in here, it's that deep core layer as opposed to the six-pack that sits on the top. So deep within is zipping in and activating to provide stability through the trunk, and from there we find a spine flexion. So we're not just folding over, but we're recruiting those spine stabilizers. So from that crook position, we draw navel to spine, and there is a lengthening sensation as well. So again, not just folding, but creating that length and then the deep spine flexion as well. So you can recruit each and every one of the little deep spine flexors and deep spine stabilizers as you find your C shape. So we create that length, initially stacking the spine all the way upright, pull navel into spine, corseting all of those transverse abdominis muscles together. So again, we're not creating just that outward bulging sensation or outward bulging activation of the rectus abdominis and all the other muscles around that area, but rather zipping navel to spine with an activation. So it's not a vacuum suction either, but rather a deep connection into that space, where then we can find that C shape, where again the pelvis tucks into posterior pelvic tilt, sit bones start to send towards the heels or upwards towards the backs of the knees, and there's this lifting sensation as you find your C shape as well. So we're not folding and dumping and collapsing, not bulging outwards, but we have that deep core connection. Shoulders remain soft, because as we tend to fold over, the shoulders want to reach forward, maybe they even scrunch up. So you want to soften those shoulders, maybe retracting if you want to focus more into that core, so you have more neutral shoulder alignment, or perhaps you want to protract the shoulders if that's something that you want to incorporate into the class and into the lesson, into that anatomical awareness. Big tendency as well is to bulge out the belly. So keep the range small so you can keep the activation supportive. Once you lose strength and integrity, the other muscles tend to compensate and everything tends to bulge outwards. So you only want to go over into that C curve as much as you're recruiting these deep abdominal stabilizers. So transverse abdominis sets that foundation, but the obliques and the rectus abdominis do form part of the movers and stabilizers once you're in that position. Otherwise, you would just keel over into your lying down. So those muscles are still working, but you want the stability to come through those corseting muscles of your transverse abdominis in your C shape. If somebody is very stiff into that lumbar spine, they do struggle to find that lumbar flexion. So perhaps in their C shape, they are compensating primarily through that thoracic spine, where there is naturally a lot of spine flexion just based on the direction of those spine vertebrae. So a little bit of thoracic flexion is fine, but use the opportunity to flex into the lumbar spine that little bit extra, so there's more of a roundness happening in through the lower back, which will start to stretch out the muscles on that lower back into that lumbar spine area. From our C shape, I like to incorporate some arm flexion, alternating, or both arms at the same time. So if there is sufficient stability coming from the transverse abdominis, we can start to include or introduce those arms. So the spine needs to be pretty stable in order for the arms to be able to lift. The further back you're working, the heavier or more gravity, or the longer the lever, so these muscles on the front have to work that little bit harder. So if somebody is struggling in this position, get them to not go so far back. So perhaps they can find the C curve, but once everything lifts up, that's when the bulging starts to kick in. So we draw them back up into that slightly less deep C curve position, and then we go one arm at a time because we want only the weight of one arm. If that is tolerable and they can maintain that abdominal activation when they're raising one arm at a time, and if you're going nice and slow, you'll definitely already feel it. You'll feel that tendency for the belly muscles to bulge out, or even to lose that C shape as the arms lift up. So belly to spine, ribs drawn inwards as you raise those arms up. And again, there's a tendency for the ribs to flare over there. We want to dissociate the arm flexion away from your thoracic extension, because as the arms lift, if this is super stiff, the spine tends to arch in order to create that range of motion through the shoulder. If the spine is stiff, or even if the shoulder joint is stiff as well, so perhaps the shoulder can only get this far and you're asking for a little extra, and the only way they're going to get it is through extension through the spine, which is actually a fun exercise, but not the point. So if you can start to isolate that spine extension, have a little bit of fun with that. But traditionally, or biomechanically, utilizing from a neutral alignment, that the ribs are activating and stabilizing into that trunk and into that C shape as those arms start to lift up alongside the ears. And can we maintain transverse abdominis, rectus abdominis, the lateral oblique stabilizers, as we lift those arms up and start to increase the lever and increase the work required from those muscles as the arms reach further and further back. And as I'm fatiguing, it's again starting to bulge outwards. Can I draw it a little bit more in whilst maintaining that posterior pelvic tilt? And it's exhausting.